There's a certain mindset that has quietly shaped so much of our world, but it's a mindset that almost no one actually practices. This isn't really the story of a company, it's about the philosophy that built it. We're talking about the architecture of long-term thinking. So let me start by asking you a really fundamental question. In a world that seems to be moving faster and faster every single day, what is it that truly gives an idea lasting power? Just keep that question in the back of your mind as we go, because the answer, well, it might not be what you think. When you hear the name Jeff Bezos, these are probably the words that pop into your head, right? Founder, billionaire, the man who created Amazon. And sure, they're accurate, but they're also just scratching the surface. Because, see, those labels, they only describe the results. They don't tell you anything about the cause. They completely miss the real underlying story of how it all happened. The what is famous, for sure, but the why? That's where the real lesson is. And that's exactly what we're going to focus on. We're not just looking at a business today. We are deconstructing a mental architecture. We're trying to get inside a different kind of mind, one that operates on a timeline that's just fundamentally different from almost everyone else's. So here it is, the core idea in a nutshell. Jeff Bezos represents a discipline that is becoming almost extinct, long-term thinking in a world that is screaming for short-term results. And that one single contrast, it explains pretty much everything. All right, so how do you build an architecture like this? Well, it all starts with having a completely different relationship with time. It's about learning to think in decades, not in quarters. This is the standard operating system for pretty much all of modern business, the quarter. It's a 90-day sprint, totally driven by earnings reports, by stock market reactions, by getting immediate results. It's reactive, it's frantic, and its horizon is never more than a few months away. Now, some companies, the really smart ones, they manage to break free from that cycle. They plan in years. They'll develop 3-year, maybe 5-year strategies. And that allows for much more meaningful growth, kind of like a tree that gets to establish its roots and grows steadily through the seasons. But the architecture we're exploring today, wow, it operates on another level entirely. Decades. We're talking about a geological timescale, in business terms. Thinking this way allows you to make bets that are they're completely incomprehensible to that quarterly mindset. Bets that might not pay off for 10, 15, or, maybe even 20 years. But look, a long-term vision is pretty useless without a way to actually make it happen. And this is where the real genius is. It's not just about being patient, it's about building engines that grow themselves. It's about creating compounding systems. So what is a compounding system? Well, think of it as a framework that's designed for one single purpose: to create relentless, self-reinforcing momentum. Think about something like Amazon Web Services or Fulfillment by Amazon. These weren't just products. They were platforms engineered so that the more people use them, the more powerful and valuable they became. It creates this cycle of almost unstoppable growth. Okay, but if you're planning over decades, in a world where technology and markets are just constantly in flux, how do you stay on course? You need a fixed point, right? A true north. For Amazon, that compass has always been the customer. And this isn't just some corporate slogan you'd see on a poster. The source material here frames customer obsession as a strategic anchor. And why is that? Because while your competitors will change and technologies will definitely change, the fundamental desires of a customer, things like lower prices, faster delivery, bigger selection, those things stay remarkably stable over time. And that stability, that's the foundation you need to be patient for decades. So you might be wondering, what does this philosophy from the past have to do with the future, with the age of AI? Well, it turns out everything. Because in an era that is completely defined by speed, having a long-term mindset becomes the ultimate counter-strategy. Just take a look at this comparison. The AI age, it's all about lightning-fast execution, right? It's about the ability for pretty much anyone to cheaply imitate a new feature. It's a world of sprints. But the long-term architect, they're not running sprints. They're focused on building enduring value through patient compounding. They're creating things that imitation just can't easily replicate. Which brings us right back to that question from the beginning. What is the ultimate competitive advantage? According to this way of thinking, it isn't speed. Speed can be copied. It's patience. It's the discipline to build layer by layer over a timescale that your competitors simply cannot afford to match. And this leaves us with one final thought. As the world accelerates, the ability to play the long game becomes the rarest skill of all. and because of that, maybe the most powerful. The final question isn't really about technology, it's about temperament. In a world that only knows how to sprint, who's going to have the patience to build?
So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on something really powerful. It's not about Jeff Bezos, the person, or even the Amazon empire, really. We're going to dissect the mental model behind it all. It's a framework for thinking that, honestly, challenges some of our most common professional instincts.
But before we dive in, I want to start with a question. Why are we so wired for the short term? What is it about the immediate, the tangible, the right now that just pulls us in, especially at work? Understanding that pull, well, that's really the first step to finding a different and maybe better path.
You see, the thing is, thinking short-term, it's not some kind of character flaw. It's more like our default setting. It's the path of least resistance, right? We live in a world that is constantly demanding immediate answers, and let's be honest, it rewards those quick, visible results. And it's easy to see why that default is so powerful, isn't it? I mean, the pressure is immediate. It's tangible. It's the quarterly report staring you in the face, the weekly metrics flashing on your screen, that project deadline that's, well, it's tomorrow. You can't ignore them. And then you have long-term goals, which they just feel so abstract and far away in comparison.
But there is another way. Now, it's not the easy path, for sure. It operates on a completely different timeline. And it requires a conscious choice. The choice to lift your gaze up from what's right in front of you and actually focus on the horizon.
And this quote really gets to the heart of it. It describes the deliberate trade-off. Think about that. It's not about ignoring profits. It's about prioritizing positioning. It's choosing to invest in where you'll be 5, maybe even 10 years from now, even if that means your balance sheet doesn't look quite as impressive this quarter.
So let's really put these two mindsets side by side. You've got short-term thinking, which is all about immediate pressure, right? The goal is the quick win. Then you have long-term thinking. That's driven by strategic positioning, and the goal there is durable, lasting growth. And this is the key. These aren't just slightly different, they're fundamentally different ways of operating.
Okay, so the big question is, how does this patient approach actually work? How does it create a real competitive edge? Well, the power isn't a concept that we all get when it comes to money, but we rarely apply it to strategy. And that concept is compounding. It's that quiet, almost invisible force of small, consistent efforts that just build on each other day after day until they create something massive.
And this compounding advantage isn't just one thing. It's built on 3 key pillars, kind of in a sequence. First, it gives you room to experiment. That experimentation then builds the resilience you need to handle short-term criticism. And finally, those two things together lead to this silent, compounding growth, where these small advantages build up, often totally unnoticed by your competition until it's way too late for them to catch up.
So let's break down that first pillar, experimentation. Real, game-changing innovation, it requires experimentation. And you know what real experimentation requires? Failure. Lots of it sometimes. Having that long-term horizon gives you the space, both psychologically and financially, to try things that might not pan out. You learn from them, you adapt, and eventually you find those breakthroughs that the short-term thinkers, well, they'll always miss them because they just can't afford to fail.
All right, the second pillar is all about resilience, fortitude. Because let's be real, when you're playing the long game, you are absolutely going to look foolish to people who are only focused on the next quarter. They're just not going to get it. And the ability to absorb that criticism, to stand firm against market doubt and just stick to your vision, honestly, that is a genuine superpower.
And that brings us to the third pillar, which is where the real magic happens, the compounding. It's the little things, a slightly better customer experience here, a more efficient process there. By themselves, they're just small, incremental wins. But over years, they build on each other, they interlock, they create this deep strategic moat around what you're doing that becomes incredibly difficult for anyone else to even try to copy.
Okay, now this next part is absolutely crucial to understand. There's a really important distinction to be made here. This whole long-term approach, it is not about being passive. It's not just sitting back and waiting for good things to happen.
No, this is active positioning. It means you are deliberately making strategic moves today that are designed to create a very specific, very advantageous future. Every single decision, every investment, every new initiative, it's like a chess move on a board that extends years and years into the future. So what keeps this whole long-term strategy from just drifting off course? It needs an anchor, a North Star. For Amazon, that anchor was a relentless, non-negotiable obsession with the customer. That external focus is what guides every decision and ensures the long-term vision doesn't just become a daydream. It stays grounded and purposeful.
Okay, so how do we take this big idea and apply it to our own careers? It really comes down to asking a different set of questions. Instead of just thinking about your next performance review, you start asking, what skills am I building? What relationships am I cultivating? What knowledge am I gaining that will have the most value 5 years from now?
When you think about it, this entire mental model is a direct challenge to a really common and I think dangerous habit that so many of us fall into. It's that habit of optimizing everything for the quick win, the next promotion, the immediate bonus, and we often do it at the expense of building the things that actually matter in the long run. You know, the skills, the reputation, the deep knowledge that create durable career growth.
And so let's end where we began, with a question for you to think about. I want you to really look at your daily work, your priorities, everything you're putting your effort into. Are those efforts pieces of a long-term architecture? Are you building something with durable value? Or are you just laying down bricks to grab the next quick win? The answer to that question, well, that defines your horizon.
Today, we're going to deconstruct a powerful mental model, one that really reshaped an entire industry. It comes from Jeff Bezos, and it's a simple but incredibly profound idea: customer obsession. So I want to start by asking you a question, a really direct one. In your work, in your business, is the goal of just satisfying the customer truly the highest bar you can set? Is it actually enough? You know, for most businesses, the answer is a pretty clear yes. Customer satisfaction is the standard. It's the metric we all know. It's what we survey for, what we build our KPIs around. It's the accepted goal line. But what if satisfaction isn't the finish line? What if it's just the starting point? Bezos argued for a far more rigorous, a much more demanding standard, one that goes way beyond simply meeting expectations. And this is where we get to the core of it all, the distinction between satisfying a customer and being obsessed with them. And listen, this isn't about better service scripts or being friendlier on the phone. It's a fundamental shift in mindset. Let's break down this contrast because it's at the heart of the whole mindset. Satisfaction is reactive, right? It's about operating in the present, solving problems as they come up. Obsession, on the other hand, is proactive. It's about operating in the future, trying to anticipate needs customers don't even know they have yet. It's a strategic choice to invest in long-term trust, which is an asset that just keeps growing, rather than just optimizing for today's numbers. And here's the trade-off. This is the hard part. It's the willingness to prioritize that long-term trust over your short-term margins. This means you might have to make decisions that don't look great on a quarterly report, but they build an unbreakable bond with your customer over years. That kind of discipline is really the engine of this whole mindset. So, if that's the what, let's talk about the how. How is this actually built? Because this kind of obsession doesn't happen by accident, and it's not some vague cultural value you put on a poster. It's an architecture, a system that you design with real intention. The process itself sounds almost deceptively simple. First, you don't start with your product or what you're good at. You start with the customer's pain point. Second, you work backwards from their ideal solution. You literally imagine the perfect outcome from their perspective, and only then do you figure out the technical steps to make it happen. And finally, you build a durable system to deliver that value again and again consistently. Now, to actually execute this process, you have to make a difficult, very deliberate choice. You have to decide who's going to bear the burden of complexity. In this model, the company decides to take on the internal inconvenience, all the friction, so that you can create external simplicity and value for the customer. And this completely reframes how we even define innovation. It stops being about some flash of genius in a boardroom. Instead, innovation becomes this disciplined response to a real, observed, unmet customer need. Suddenly, the customer, not your own internal ambition, becomes the true source of your next great idea. Okay, so let's bring this all back to your own work, because this mindset isn't just for CEOs or founders. It's like a true north that can guide the daily decisions of any professional in any role. The absolute key to applying this is to understand that true customer obsession is built on systems, not on individual heroics. Think about it. One person staying late to fix a customer's problem is a band-aid. A system designed so that problem never happens in the first place, that is obsession in practice. Heroics just aren't scalable. Well-designed systems are. I want you to think about your own processes for a minute. What is their default state? If you do nothing, if no one intervenes, does the process naturally spit out a result that is in the customer's best interest?
designing for that default outcome, that is the very essence of building an architecture of trust.
And this brings us to the single question this entire mindset is built on, a question I want you to take back to your own work. Look past your immediate team, past your manager, past your internal dashboards. Ask yourself, who at the very end of the line ultimately experiences the outcome of what I do every single day? Defining that person as your true customer, that is the first and most essential step toward obsession. Today, we're going to deconstruct a really powerful mental model. It's one that underpins some of the most durable companies and, frankly, some of the most durable careers out there. We're going to explore what I'm calling the architecture of autonomy, and we'll do it by looking at Jeff Bezos' unique way of thinking about systems. It really is the essential question, isn't it? Whether you're trying to build a company, lead a team, or just build your own professional reputation, how do you create something that has real enduring value? Something that doesn't just survive, but actually thrives over the long haul. You know, at the very heart of that question, there's a fundamental choice to be made. Are you going to build your success on the brilliance of individuals, on heroes who swoop in and save the day? Or do you build it on something more stable, something more predictable? Do you build it on systems? This quote from Bezos really gets to the core of his philosophy. The central idea here is that depending on individual heroics is actually a major vulnerability. It creates a single point of failure. True durability, the kind that lasts, comes from well-designed mechanisms that produce results consistently, no matter who happens to be operating them. So, to really understand this philosophy, we first have to define its core component. What exactly is a mechanism in this context? Let's break it down, because it's a very specific idea. A mechanism isn't just a vague term for a process. As it's defined here, it's a tool that's been designed with very specific qualities in mind. It has to be repeatable, it has to be scalable, and it has to be independent. It's almost like it's been engineered to be immune to human variability. So these are the three pillars of that design. Repeatable means the process generates the same quality output, time and time again. Scalable means it works just as well for 10 customers as it does for 10 million. And independent, this one's key. It means the process itself is the asset. It doesn't rely on one person's unique talent or their mood that day. Okay, so let's see how this concept moves from being a theory into an operational reality. How did Amazon actually take this idea of a mechanism and weave it into the very fabric of the company? Well, they focused on a few key areas. First, they built systems that are, in a way, self-aware. A great example is Amazon's Andon cord system. It allows any employee in a fulfillment center to stop the entire production line if they spot a quality issue. The goal isn't just to have people looking for problems, it's to have processes that automatically surface issues. It's like creating an organizational immune system. Second, they engineered continuous improvement directly into the system itself. An effective mechanism doesn't just do a task, it gathers data on its own performance. Think about Amazon's recommendation engine. It doesn't just suggest products, it learns from every single click, every purchase, to constantly refine its future suggestions. It adapts without needing constant manual intervention. And third, they established what you could call durable decision frameworks. A famous example is Bezos' distinction between Type 1 and Type 2 decisions. Type 1 decisions are one-way doors. They're consequential and basically irreversible. Those have to be made slowly, carefully. But Type 2 decisions are two-way doors. They're reversible. They should be made quickly. This framework replaces subjective judgment with a reliable, structured approach to risk. So the crucial takeaway here is the compounding effect of this whole approach. When you reduce your reliance on heroes, the entire organization just becomes more reliable. And when your core operations are stable and predictable, it creates the safety and the freedom you need to experiment and innovate on top of that solid foundation. Now, let's pivot. Let's take this powerful concept and apply it to a much more personal scale, your own career. How can you move from just being an individual contributor to becoming the architect of your own value-creating system? This is the mental shift that has to happen. The aim isn't to produce a single masterpiece or pull off a heroic one-off project. The real goal is to build a professional system, your skills, your processes, your reputation that delivers high value consistently over the long term. Let's really consider the difference here. One-time excellence, like a single successful project, is often exhausting. It's unpredictable.
Building repeatable value, on the other hand, is about creating a durable engine for your contributions. It's about designing your own personal mechanisms, like a system for weekly learning, or a standardized process for how you onboard clients, or even just a simple template for running effective meetings. And that brings us to our final thought. When you start to look at your own work, your habits, your professional goals through this lens of systems thinking, the crucial question becomes pretty clear. What is the single most important system you need to design for yourself to create lasting, durable value in your career?
Today, we're going to explore a really different way to think about failure. Most of us see it as something to avoid, right? An event, a mistake. But what if we looked at it differently? What if we saw it as a deliberate system, an architecture, really, that's designed specifically for discovery?
So let's start with a question that probably hits home for a lot of you. In a world that's just constantly demanding breakthroughs, why does it feel like true innovation is so incredibly rare in our day-to-day professional lives? Well, the answer lies in this fundamental conflict we all live with. On one hand, there's this huge pressure to innovate, to come up with the next big thing. But on the other hand, our professional worlds are often designed to do the exact opposite, to minimize risk. And in doing that, they end up punishing the one thing that innovation absolutely requires: experimentation. And, well, its constant companion: failure. All right, so to really understand how to break that cycle, we have to first look at how we usually frame failure. And for most of us, it's a perspective that's deeply personal and, let's be honest, pretty painful. This quote really just nails it, doesn't it? The reason we're so afraid to experiment is because failure is visible. It's not a private thing that happens in a lab. It's public. It can get attached to your reputation, to your performance review, and even to your sense of who you are at work. And that visibility, well, it creates this powerful unspoken pressure to just avoid risk, to play it safe. And here's the thing. When a project or an idea doesn't pan out, what's the first thing we think? Usually it's that something went wrong with the execution, that it was a flaw in performance. It's almost never seen as just a necessary or even a productive step in a much bigger process of discovery. And that one perception, that's what creates a culture of avoidance. It just quietly suffocates any real creativity.
Now, let's introduce a counterframe, a totally different mental model, and it's one that Jeff Bezos articulated really well. This is where we start to reframe the entire concept. This really is the turning point in how we think about this.
So, in this model, experimentation isn't some optional activity that comes with a risk of failure. No, it's the non-negotiable price you pay for discovery. It's the cost of admission. So those so-called failures that come from experiments, they're not mistakes. They're just the tuition fee you pay in the search for what actually works. And this is the principle you really have to internalize. Most experiments will fail. And that's not a flaw. That is the design. If you're building a system for discovery, you have to accept from the get-go that most paths are going to lead to a dead end. A high failure rate isn't a bug in the system. It's the main feature.
So this mindset, it's more than just a nice philosophy, It's an actual operating system, a set of logical rules that make accepting failure not just okay, but completely rational.
In Bezos's framework, this isn't about having a gut feeling that it's okay to fail. No, it's a completely logical system. It's built on 3 core principles that actually turn failure into a powerful tool for innovation.
All right, so the first principle is all about managing risk. The idea is if you run lots of frequent low-cost experiments, you can spot those fatal flaws and dead ends really early on. Think of it this way. Every small, manageable failure is like an inoculation. It protects you from a massive, catastrophic failure down the road.
Second principle, learning compounds way faster than perfection. I mean, think about it. The amount of knowledge you get from 100 small experiments, even if 99 of them don't work out, that knowledge just compounds so much faster than the tiny bits of progress you make trying to perfect one single idea behind closed doors. The speed of learning, that becomes your main measure of progress, not perfection.
And the third principle? It's just a dose of reality. Real breakthroughs, they don't care about your quarterly timeline or your Gantt chart. They're totally unpredictable. So your system has to be built for constant exploration, not just for executing a schedule you already set. You've got to be running experiments all the time, so you're ready when that moment of discovery finally hits.
Okay, so how do you actually adopt a system like this? Well, it really comes down to a crucial internal shift, a change in how you process the results of your work.
This is the absolute core of the mental shift, reframing failure as data, not as part of your identity. When an experiment doesn't give you the result you wanted, it's not a personal defeat. It's just new information. It's data. And that data is incredibly valuable because it lights up the path forward by telling you exactly where not to go. So let's really look at the difference here. When failure is tied up with your identity, it feels emotional, it's personal, it feels final. And that's what leads to fear. But when you reframe failure as just data, it becomes objective, impersonal, and iterative, just one step in a longer process. And that shift in perspective, that's what unlocks real curiosity and resilience.
Okay, so the big question: how do we actually apply this in our own work? How do we build a system for disciplined exploration instead of just, random chaotic failure? And this is absolutely key. This operating system for failure is not a license to be reckless. Not at all. It's about highly disciplined exploration. It means you have to define the boundaries of your experiments before you even start. You have to ask, what's the specific question we're trying to answer? And what's the absolute maximum cost in time, in money, and resources that we're willing to pay for that answer? Doing that creates a kind of safe container where failure can actually be productive.
So, we'll end by turning this question back to you. If you were to really adopt this architecture for discovery, if you started seeing failure not as the end of the road, but simply as the price of learning, what might you find? What amazing discovery might be waiting for you right on the other side of your next small, well-defined experiment?
Today, we're going to explore a mental model for raising the quality of our most important decisions. It comes from Jeff Bezos, and it's more than just a framework for making choices. It's really about how to structure our thinking with discipline and incredible clarity. So let's start with a paradox that I think defines a very common professional struggle. You've probably seen it. Why is it that we often spend weeks, maybe even months, debating a minor, totally reversible choice, yet will commit to a major strategic shift with almost startling speed? This mismatch between our effort and the actual consequences, that's a primary source of wasted energy and some really significant missteps. And the root of the problem is this: most of us, often without even realizing it, apply the exact same process to every single decision, no matter how big or small. This sort of one-size-fits-all approach is a habit, an unconscious default. And it's exactly where all that friction, that inefficiency, and ultimately where poor long-term outcomes are born. It's a really costly way to operate. Now, the solution here lies in a really powerful distinction that Bezos made between two fundamental types of decisions. He used a simple analogy: doors. You see, some doors are two-way. You can walk through, and if you don't like what's on the other side, you can just turn around and walk right back. But other doors, they're one-way. Once you cross that threshold, there is no going back. Okay, so first, let's talk about the two-way doors. These are the reversible decisions. Because the cost of being wrong is low, the entire system should be designed for speed. These kinds of choices should be made by individuals or small, trusted teams, people who can act decisively without getting completely bogged down in endless analysis. But then you have the one-way doors, the irreversible decisions. These are the ones that carry significant long-term weight. Think about fundamental strategic shifts or major architectural commitments. These demand a totally different process. They need to be slow, methodical. They require deep debate and really careful scrutiny from a lot of different perspectives. And here's the critical insight. Failing to make this distinction doesn't just cause random errors. No, it creates predictable patterns of failure. When we treat a reversible two-way door choice like it's a massive, irreversible one, we get completely stuck in analysis paralysis. And when we do the opposite, when we treat a huge one-way door decision like it's a two-way door, we end up making reckless and often fatal commitments. So by classifying every decision up front, this framework helps us sidestep those really common traps. First, it prevents that analysis paralysis over issues that are, frankly, reversible. It also puts a stop to the kind of reckless speed that leads to catastrophic errors on the choices that truly matter. And maybe just as important, it de-escalates conflict by getting the whole team aligned on what the true stakes of a decision actually are. This whole thing reveals a much deeper principle of professional effectiveness. The goal isn't just speed for speed's sake. The primary goal is decision quality. High-quality thinking. That's what drives superior long-term results.
The right speed for a decision is just a byproduct of correctly identifying what kind of decision you're making in the first place.
And when you scale this way of thinking across an entire organization, this clarity creates a really powerful culture of ownership. You empower people to make those reversible decisions quickly, which fosters velocity and momentum. But at the same time, they know exactly when to pull the brake, slow down, and seek counsel for those big, irreversible ones. The entire system just becomes aligned toward more thoughtful, more effective action.
So, how do you actually apply this? Well, it boils down to a simple 3-step discipline. First, just explicitly identify the decision that's in front of you. Second, you have to ask that crucial question: is this a one-way or a two-way door? And then third, based on your answer, you deliberately calibrate your process. You either move with speed and autonomy, or you move with patience and deliberation. And so, we'll leave you with this question to reflect on. As you look at the choices you're facing this week, this month, which of them is truly a one-way door? Just identifying it is the first, and honestly, the most critical step toward giving that decision the disciplined, high-quality thinking it actually deserves.
You know, the quality of our work, the impact we really have in our careers, it isn't just about what we do, it's about how we think. The actual structure of our thoughts is what determines whether our contributions last. Today, we're going to look at a powerful mental model, one championed by Jeff Bezos, that draws a really sharp line between two ways of approaching our work.
So let's just start with a question to frame all of this. I want you to think about your own professional life, your projects, your responsibilities. Do you approach them as an owner, or do you approach them as a renter? And this has nothing to do with your job title or if you have equity. It's purely about your mindset.
Bezos often framed professional mindsets around this core idea. It's a simple distinction, but it's incredibly profound, and it can really help us understand our own motivations and, ultimately, become more effective in the long run. So let's dig into what truly separates these two ways of thinking.
Okay, so the core difference really comes down to this. What is your goal? What are you optimizing for? A renter's mindset, well, it focuses on what looks good right now. It's about polishing the surface, making sure things look good for immediate approval. The owner's mindset, though, is playing a totally different game. It's fundamentally concerned with strength and resilience over time. It optimizes for durability, for building something that is meant to last.
So, if we want to cultivate that ownership mindset, what does it actually look like? Well, the source material suggests it rests on 3 foundational pillars. Let's take a look at how this architecture is built, one piece at a time. The first pillar is all about thinking beyond the immediate result. You know, a quick fix might solve today's problem, but what if it creates 2 bigger problems tomorrow? An owner mentally traces the ripples of every decision, thinking not just about the direct result, but about all those subsequent, less obvious consequences down the line.
And the second pillar takes that a step further. It's about caring, truly caring about the long-term consequences. This isn't just an intellectual exercise of predicting what might happen. It's a genuine investment in the future health of the project or the team or the company. The key is that owners feel the weight of future outcomes as if they were happening today.
And the third pillar, well, this is perhaps the most critical one. For an owner, trust is not a soft skill. It is a core asset. Trust with your customers, with your colleagues, with your partners, that's the essential foundation that durable value is built on. It's something that can take years to build and just moments to destroy, and an owner protects it with everything they've got. Now, these mindsets aren't just some abstract philosophies. They have direct, tangible consequences for our careers. The choice between them really defines the kind of professional contribution we're going to make.
And here, you can see the stakes laid out pretty clearly. A renter's focus on short-term appearance often just leads to busy work. You know, activity that looks productive, but doesn't have any deep, lasting value. They become a contributor. An owner, on the other hand, is focused on meaningful impact. And this is the mindset that ultimately separates a contributor from a true leader. When we consciously make that shift, when we shift our focus from just getting immediate validation to creating long-term durability, our entire professional philosophy starts to change. It completely reframes our relationship with time, with challenges, and even with success itself. This is such a powerful insight. Patience is so often seen as a struggle, right? A virtue we have to force on ourselves. But from an owner's perspective, it's not a struggle at all. When you are building something to last, patience becomes a natural, necessary byproduct of that commitment. It's the calm confidence that comes from playing the long game.
And so we end right where we began, with a question for you to reflect on.
Beyond your daily tasks and your immediate goals, I want you to look at the whole arc of your career, your relationships, your skills. What are you building not just for appearance, but for true durability? What are you choosing to own? Today, we're going to deconstruct a really powerful mental model, one that quietly drives incredible long-term success. We're talking about the strategic architecture of patience, a concept that thinkers like Jeff Bezos have used to build a lasting advantage.
So this leads us to a fundamental question. When you think of patience, do you see it as just waiting around, a kind of inaction, or do you see it as something more, a deliberate competitive advantage? How you answer that really frames your entire approach to strategy.
You see, the problem is rooted in a very common misunderstanding. We tend to see patience as just the absence of action, right? Like you're hitting pause, waiting for things to get better on their own. Our goal here is to completely dismantle that idea and build a much more powerful framework in its place.
To do that, we've got to start by reframing how we think about patience. We need to move it out of the category of a passive virtue and into the realm of active, decisive strategy.
And here you can really see that shift in thinking. The common view, on the one hand, sees patience as just passive waiting. But the strategic view, well, that frames patience as a deliberate choice. It's not inaction at all. It's a very specific kind of action, one that's designed to build a fundamental advantage over time.
So let's put a clear definition on it. Strategic patience is a deliberate decision to let your core advantages mature and compound. And here's the crucial part of why it works so well. It thrives while your competitors are getting distracted, chasing the next new thing. It's a strategy that essentially uses the impatience of others as fuel.
Okay, so having the definition is one thing, but now we need to get into the mechanics. Why is this approach so incredibly effective in the long run? What's actually going on underneath the surface that makes it win?
Well, the success of this strategy really hinges on three inescapable realities. First, compounding. It's almost invisible at the beginning. It feels like nothing is happening. And that leads directly to the second reality: the early results are deeply misleading. They look flat, which makes you think the strategy is failing. And this is the real test because it creates the third and most important reality: most people quit too soon, right before that curve was about to take off.
And this chart really shows you the outcome of those two paths. The chasing novelty approach, it gets you small, inconsistent gains. But strategic patience, it starts slow, sure, but it eventually creates this massive compounding advantage. It's like a game of quietly accumulating energy until it becomes an undeniable force.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. This sounds counterintuitive, right? In a world that's all about speed, AI, and constant acceleration, why would a long-term strategy like patience become more valuable, not less? Let's dig into that paradox.
Think about it. In a world where AI gives almost everyone the tools to execute faster, the real competitive edge shifts. It's not so much about the speed of doing things anymore, it's about the quality and clarity of what you're doing in the first place. AI can speed up your system, but the real lasting value is in the design of that system, and that design is born from deep patience and strategic clarity.
But, and this is important, this powerful form of patience isn't some kind of blank check. It's not about blind faith. It depends entirely on one critical foundational element, and without it, the whole strategy is just unstable.
And here it is. This is the anchor. This kind of patience only works when it is reinforced by unwavering principles. Go back to Bezos. His patience wasn't just aimless waiting. It was anchored to principles he knew would still be true 10, 20 years from now. He was obsessed with what wouldn't change, that customers will always want lower prices, faster delivery, and a bigger selection. Those principles were his compass, making sure his patience was always pointed toward a stable, long-term truth.
So let's bring all of this back to you, because strategic patience isn't just a model for building a company. It's a mental model for building a career, for making better decisions. And that leaves us with the essential question you have to ask yourself. What are the unwavering principles that will anchor your patience?
You know, in a world that's just throwing high-stakes decisions at us constantly, you have to wonder, how do the most effective people stay so clear and consistent? Well, it turns out they don't just think, they actually build an architecture for their thinking. So in this explainer, we're going to deconstruct this really powerful mental model and see how it can truly transform the quality of your own decisions. Okay, so every single decision we make really comes from one of two places. On the one hand, you've got reactions. You know the feeling. It's impulsive, it's inconsistent, and honestly, it's just draining. But on the other hand, you have principles. These are deliberate, they're consistent, and they're built to scale. And really, that choice between getting caught in the storm or standing on a solid foundation, well, that's what can define the entire quality of our professional lives. And this brings us right to a core idea from Jeff Bezos, who said, principles scale better than instincts. Now, that word scale, that's everything. Think about it. Your gut instinct might get you through one problem, right? But what happens when your responsibilities grow, when the challenges get way more complex? Instinct just doesn't hold up. A principle, though, that's a framework you can apply over and over, no matter how big the challenge gets.
All right, so let's move from the what to the how. What's the actual functional purpose of operating from a set of principles, especially when things get demanding at work?
Well, principles really serve three critical functions that help us shift from being reactive to deliberate. First, they act as a guide when you're under pressure. They're like a North Star that helps you see clearly through all the noise. Second, they create consistency, right? So the decisions you make today actually line up with the ones you made yesterday. And finally, and this is a big one, they reduce your cognitive load. Instead of having to figure everything out from scratch every single time, you've got this reliable framework you can just lean on.
Okay, so now let's look at the architecture of a decision. We're going to see how these principles stop being just an idea and become real, practical tools. How is this actually put into practice at a place like Amazon?
And here's the key insight. A principle isn't some fluffy corporate slogan you hang on a wall. It's an actual engineered tool for making decisions. So, for example, at Amazon, when they faced a tough trade-off, the question wasn't, hey, what feels right here? The question was, which one of our leadership principles helps us solve this? And that right there, that's the big shift from just a subjective feeling to a clear, repeatable process.
So, having seen the concept and how it's applied, let's bring this back to you. How can you use this to stay calm amid the uncertainty we all face in our professional lives?
I mean, think about it. How do you maintain clarity when everything around you seems to be in flux? In these fast-moving environments, the pressure is constant. It can lead to real decision fatigue, you start being inconsistent, and you just burn out. It's like trying to find your way when the ground itself is shifting. So, how do you stay oriented? The answer is that a core set of principles acts as your anchor. They provide stability. While everything on the outside might be chaotic and changing, your principles, they don't. And that's what gives you the stability you need for calm, clear thinking. It allows you to operate with real purpose, even right in the middle of the storm.
So, let's bring this all together. These ideas we've been talking about, guidance, consistency, stability, they aren't just separate little benefits. They all integrate into one cohesive mental framework. What we're really talking about here is building an architecture for your thinking. It's a deliberate system that you build for yourself to improve the quality and consistency of your decisions, not just for today, but for your entire career. It really is the difference between building on sand versus building on solid bedrock.
And this leaves us with a final point of reflection. This isn't about just copying Jeff Bezos' principles, or anyone else's for that matter. It's about figuring out your own. So, the question I'll leave you with is this. What are the principles that truly guide your thinking? What are those fundamental rules you lean on when it really counts? Because answering that, that's the first step to building your own durable architecture for thinking.
Hello. Today, we're going to explore the mental architecture behind one of the most significant careers in modern business. We're going to deconstruct the thinking of Jeff Bezos, but not by looking at what he built. We're going to look at how he thought.
So when you look at that incredible trajectory, you have to ask yourself, what was the real engine behind all that success? It's a question that really forces you to look past the headlines, to the framework underneath it all.
The common answer? Well, it's pretty simple. Brilliance. The idea that he was just a singular genius born with this incredible mind that set him apart right from the start.
But if you dig into the source material, a different answer starts to take shape, something more foundational. His success wasn't really rooted in some trait he was born with. No, it was about a set of principles that he practiced. The foundation, it turns out, was discipline.
So to really get this, we have to move past that simple story of just brilliance. We need to look at the operating system that was running underneath it all.
And here's the key insight. It wasn't just one thing. It was a synthesis, a deliberate combination of different mental models that, once he wove them together, created this incredibly powerful way of thinking about building things and making decisions.
Now, this synthesis is built on 7 core components. And it's really important to think of them not just as a checklist you can tick off, but as a deeply interconnected framework. A framework for both thought and action.
All right, so here they are, the 7 disciplines. Let's just touch on a few to get a feel for them. First, you've got long-term thinking. This is all about choosing multi-year outcomes over short-term quarterly gains. I mean, just think about AWS. It was nurtured for a decade before it really became a profit engine. Then there's customer obsession, that famous idea of starting with the customer and working backwards. That's exactly where things like one-click ordering and Prime came from. And of course, system design. This focus on building processes that can scale, that are automated, that just remove human friction. So those, along with the others you see here, decision clarity, experimentation, ownership, and patience, they make up the whole framework. And what's crucial is that while each one is powerful on its own, their real force comes from how they all work together, how they reinforce each other.
And this leads us to what might be the single most important distinction in this whole idea. It's the difference between a personal trait and a practice discipline.
Look, this distinction is absolutely foundational. We're not talking about personality here. We're talking about practiced disciplines. And this is way more than just a word game, right? It's not semantics. It fundamentally changes how we understand this entire model and what we can do with it. And the implication of that is, well, it's profound. Think about it. An innate trait is fixed. You're either born with it or you're not. But a discipline? That's something that can be learned. It can be cultivated. You can practice it. It's malleable. And that simple fact transforms this whole model from something you just sort of admire from a distance into something that you or anyone can actually adopt.
Okay, so what does this all mean for us, right now, in our professional lives? Well, this is where it becomes the critical differentiator.
So why does this whole trait versus discipline thing matter so much right now? Its relevance just snaps into focus when you look at the modern world of work, especially with the rise of incredibly powerful new technologies.
First, let's just be clear on what we mean by tools. In this context, a tool is just something that multiplies our effort. And of course, AI is the ultimate example, right? It lets us do things faster, at a scale we never could have imagined before.
Disciplines, though, they operate on a totally different level, a deeper level. They're frameworks that multiply our thinking. See the difference? They don't just help you do more, they help you decide what to do in the first place. They improve the quality, the clarity of the thought that comes before you ever take action.
And this brings us right to the core takeaway. In an age where these amazing tools are becoming available to pretty much everyone, the tools themselves stop being the main advantage. I mean, if everyone has a multiplier for their effort, what really sets you apart? Well, it's the quality of the thinking that directs that effort. It's the frameworks used to see the world, to make decisions, to orient yourself for the long term. Those are the things that will truly differentiate you. So the final question we should leave you with isn't what tools do you have, it's what disciplines do you practice.
All right, let's dive in. In this explainer, we're going to deconstruct the architecture of thought that sits behind truly extraordinary results. We'll be looking at a powerful mental model inspired by the principles of Jeff Bezos that's all about prioritizing long-term design over short-term intensity. So let's start with this core idea. Success is not about intensity, it is about architecture. Now, this one thought, it really challenges a belief that's at the heart of so many professional cultures. You know, the idea that relentless, sheer effort is what ultimately drives success. Now, this isn't to say that intensity and hard work don't matter. Of course they do. But what this suggests is that our main focus shouldn't be on the volume of our work, but on the framework that guides that work. It's really a shift from working in the system to working on the system. Which brings us to a really critical question, doesn't it? If just grinding harder isn't the ultimate answer, then what is? What's the alternative for building something that's not just successful, but is actually built to last? Well, the alternative is found in a pretty profound shift in mindset. Think of it as the difference between being a builder and being an architect. A builder is focused on the immediate task, laying the next brick perfectly. But the architect is obsessed with the overall design, the underlying structure that has to support the entire building for decades. So let's be really clear about what we mean by architecture in this sense. It's the deep, underlying framework that you design before all the intense work really kicks in. It's the system that allows great things to be built patiently, deliberately, and systematically, not just through brute force or by getting lucky. And this architectural mindset is really supported by 3 core pillars. First, there's patience.
This is that commitment to a long-term vision, which you can see in how Amazon was willing to invest for years and years without seeing immediate profit. Second, there's deliberation, the practice of thinking slowly and deeply before you make those big, high-stakes decisions. And finally, there's systematic design, this obsession with creating scalable processes that remove bottlenecks and allow for massive growth.
Okay, so if that's the architecture, what's the engine that powers it? Well, it's a principle we all know, compounding. But here, we're applying it to something much more fundamental than money. We're applying it to the quality of our thought. We all get this, right? In a basic sense, one good idea leads to another, and you make steady, linear progress over time. This is what happens when you accumulate knowledge or just execute a series of smart tactics. But here is the real unlock for an architect. When you improve the quality of your thinking itself, your mental models, how you make decisions, you don't get linear growth. You get exponential growth. Why? Because a better thinking process improves the quality of every single idea and decision you make from that point forward.
So the primary goal completely shifts. It's no longer about chasing an endless stream of tactics for a quick win. The real work, the deep work, is to build your own internal machinery for making consistently better decisions. It's all about developing sound judgment.
So what happens when you put this all together? When you take this architectural approach and you power it with compounding thought, and you do it consistently over a very long period of time, what's the end result of that kind of discipline? The result is the creation of what the source material calls giants. And we're not just talking about things that are big in scale. We're talking about durable, resilient systems. Things that are built on such a sound architecture that they're designed from day one to last and to handle shocks along the way. And it is so important to understand that this way of thinking isn't just for business. Its application is universal. You can use this architectural approach to build giant companies, yes, but you can also use it to construct a truly impactful career, or even to design a well-lived life. And that brings us to our final thought, a question for you to reflect on. When you look at your most important goals, whether it's in your work, your career, or your life, what's the underlying architecture that you are patiently, deliberately, and systematically building today?